Hey guys, welcome to this Linux course. So first let's get started with the first session, which is Introduction to Linux. So first, Linux is a Unix-like operating system developed by Linus Torvalds and thousands of open source contributors. So what does Unix-like operating system mean? So there was Unix operating system even before Linux was existing. After that, Linus Torvalds came up with an idea of creating an open source distribution of Unix, which is now called as Linux. But right now, Linux is more popular than Unix, but the base of any Linux operating system is Unix because it follows the same architecture of shell and kernel and other applications. So now Linus Torvalds is the main contributor for this large open source project Linux, but there are other contributors as well. Linus Torvalds started off this project, but later on, as this is an open source project, anyone could contribute to it. So like that, there were 11,413 different changes by individual contributors. So this was after version 2.6. Before that, still there were a lot of contributions. After that, there were again a large number of contributions, even from companies like Red Hat. Red Hat is one of the most popular Linux distribution company. So Linux operating system distribution company. They have both community versions and they have paid versions. So Intel is there, Novell is there, IBM is there. There are a lot of companies and they have all made contributions to the kernel. Moving on, so Linux is an operating system. It is reliable and secure than other operating systems. Also, it is completely open source. This basically means you can take the basic Linux operating system structure and create your own operating system using that. So it was launched by Linus Torvalds in the year 1991 on 17th September. So it is reliable and secure than others. This comparison we'll do right now because right now I am using an Windows operating system to show you this particular presentation. So the most common usage of any operating system is obviously Windows because it comes inbuilt in a lot of laptops, a lot of PCs and a lot of CPUs because Windows is the most popular, the most easier operating system, and also it has a name for it for personal computers because you can play a lot of games in that. Linux is not that much compatible with games. But coming to the IT sector, coming to the development part, Linux is preferred than Windows. So one more reason for learning Linux is everywhere. So any operating system you take will have some kind of a Linux system within that. So even in Windows, you have command prompt. In Mac OS, again, you have terminal. Even in other Linux GUIs currently like CentOS, Red Hat GUI, then there is Ubuntu GUI. In all of those graphical user interfaces, still you have terminal emulators. So normally a Linux system might be a command line interface, but right now you have GUI based Linux operating systems as well. But currently you might have a phone in your hand. You might be watching this video in your phone, or your phone might be on your table, but every one of your family member right now will have a smartphone. Maybe not, but right now any smartphone which is running Android on it has Linux running on it because the Android operating system is built using Linux principles. It's built on Linux. The Android operating system is basically Linux, and you can see 85% of all smartphones are based on Linux. That means there are iPhones, there are Windows operating system phones, there are other operating systems which are again a subset of Android which comes under Linux, and this is one of the reasons. Second reason is your car uses Linux, especially self-driving cars. Not just self-driving cars. There are cars with inbuilt interfaces which have multiple operations. You can basically click on a button and the window wiper will start. So these these algorithms or these microcontroller systems are again running in Linux. Even self-driving cars need Linux to run on them. So why? Because Linux is faster, it's secure, it's reliable than other operating systems. And one more, again, refrigerators also have Linux running in them. Okay, so coming to why Linux is so popular, and I would have told you cars use Linux, your smartphones are on Linux, or even your refrigerators use Linux. There are so many other possibilities, your microwave ovens, and there are so many devices which might be using Linux. So now let us look at the supercomputers. So you might be thinking, okay, so they are on Linux, but why not Windows? Why shouldn't I keep Windows and use the Windows operating system to do all that? So here comes the fact. So you can see here, before 2003 or 2004, Unix was dominating the supercomputer market, and even there was some BSD, there was some Mac operating systems, there was some Windows operating systems running on supercomputers. But right now in 2020, the top 500 supercomputers existing in the world are running on Linux operating system. You can see the entire market is right now captured by Linux. So why all supercomputers need Linux is because Linux is lightweight, Linux is fast, Linux is secure, Linux is reliable. So coming to the fact, so if supercomputers are running Linux and they are successful using Linux, why not your PC? Why not your desktop? So basically, it's not a bad practice to use all other operating systems, but coming to the development part, Linux is more preferred by developers. It's not my personal opinion, but Linux is more preferred by developers. But if you're building an application on the .NET framework, obviously you need Windows, or you can emulate it on Linux operating system as well. You can run a Windows virtual machine on Linux. So choosing an operating system is your wish. It's for what kind of a need you need that operating system. But right now we have come to learn Linux. Let us look at more data about this Linux. So right now let's compare between Windows and Linux. So this is one of the main questions asked. What is the difference between Windows and Linux? So this you should understand very well. First, Windows Server, you need to purchase the license. Windows is not free, Windows is not open source. If you're running Windows, so if I'm running Windows currently, my Windows should be licensed. My Windows is licensed. If it is not licensed, that means it's a pirated version of that operating system. Next, Linux is free. It is open source operating system. There are paid operating systems as well in Linux, but so CentOS is free, Ubuntu is free, so you can download them and install them for free. And then not many customization options because like Windows releases few operating systems in few years. Like let's say right now we have Windows 10, maybe in a couple of years or the next year we might get a Windows 11 or 12, but you cannot customize it a lot. But in Linux there are so many different distributions. Even let's say Ubuntu, there are so many different versions in Ubuntu. Then there is CentOS, then there is Fedora. That we'll look at later. We'll look at the various distributions, but this is what is available. There are so many Linux distributions and you can choose one according to your need. And then Windows is vulnerable to viruses and malware threats. A powerful antivirus software is a need. So in Windows, without an antivirus software, if you are trying to download something from the internet, I'm pretty sure you will catch up a malware in your system, because Windows operating system is quite weak in the security aspect. It still has Windows Defender, but still Windows Defender is not equal to full-time dedicated antivirus software which basically watches all the time for malwares it detects and tries to delete it. So that's why Windows is a no-no for downloading things without antivirus. But in basically in Linux, it's more secure than Windows, and the kernel is built as such. Viruses cannot be easily broken. So for a hacker to create a code which will break the Linux system, it takes a lot of practice. The code should be very efficient so that it breaks the Linux system. So these are the differences between Windows and Linux. And before, Windows was MS-DOS, which was again a command line interface, and then there is Linux, again it was a command line interface. But then later on, operating systems got evolved. Windows got its GUI. Right now Linux also has its GUI. There are various types of GUIs. So now let us look at the different Linux distributions you can go for. Coming here, now you can see Debian, you can see Fedora, you can see Ubuntu, you can see CentOS, you can see Red Hat, and you can see SUSE. So there are still a lot of Linux distributions, but I'm just putting up some popular distributions here: Debian, Fedora, Ubuntu, and all. So CentOS is the operating system which we are going to use throughout this Linux course. So we'll not be using any other operating systems. We'll be using CentOS. CentOS is basically the community version of the Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and CentOS has all the features of any other Linux distribution. There is also Kali Linux. There is so many varieties. There is so many distributions in Linux. So you will have to go ahead and check for what exact purpose is this particular distribution better for, and choose your Linux distribution accordingly. But most probably, except the package managers, the commands, the basic Linux commands, the basic Unix commands are going to be the same in every single Linux distribution, so that it's pretty easy to move from one distribution to another. So basically, if I'm currently working on CentOS, I can easily adapt to Ubuntu. So it's like that. So now guys, I think we've done the first part. So this is the introduction to Linux. So meet you in the next session.